Start now. Just like I did last time, I'm going to try to stay here near the computer, which I don't really like to do, but because a good part of your final exam is going to be based on what I'm actually presenting in the class. And I've noticed that if I don't sit at my computer, it's hard to hear the recording. So I want you to be able to, when you're reviewing, there are areas that you want to go back, not just look at the slides, but hear what happened in class, and that you have a better chance to do that later. So today I hope to get all the way through emotions so that we can start next time on self. Emotions, you might recall from last time, is sort of the last piece that we need in order to complete our model for how we think, and that's because emotions are part of how we think. So after that, we can get into the concept of self, which uses the model to help us better understand how a self, an entity, can have a concept of itself. So when you're building an artificial system, if you want to create this concept of self, you'll be able to do that, I think, after we get through this class and look at the models with everything together. Okay, so the quote for today is a guy whose name I'm going to try to pronounce is Jacques Hengseth. He's from a small country named Estonia, and he recently passed away a couple of years ago. He coined the term, meaning he's recognized as being the first person to use the term affective neuroscience. And he has a good book, actually, that was written quite some time ago. And I say it's good because he sort of does a good job of recognizing what's known and what's not known. So he presents things in a way that's that helps you, better sort of helps you avoid confusion about what is known versus what is not known. It's a textbook on emotions and neuroscience. So what he said is to understand the basic emotional operating systems. And he wasn't writing a computer science book. The operating systems of the brain, we have to begin relating incomplete sets of neurological facts to poorly understood psychological phenomena that emerge from many interacting brain activities. So he's not being mean, he's just basically letting the reader know that we know some things about the brain from a cellular and structural perspective, some of the things we discussed in earlier classes like DNA and RNA and the glia cells and the neurons. But that by and large, we're certain they're incomplete, and if anything, maybe we're even just scratching the surface of what we would need to know to understand how the brain fully works. And then coupling that to the psychological phenomenon, which is what we've been discussing in class, which is how we behave, and then trying to fit those pieces together. Okay, final exam still going to be May 13th, early in the morning. I am toying around with the idea of actually not having an online component, because when I sort of laid out what I think needs to be on the final exam, I felt like it could be done in a comprehensive way, well within the 2-hour limit. If as I put some more meat on the final exam bone, I feel like some of it might require more time to make sure it's stress-free for you. Then I'll rethink that. But right now, I'm just sharing with you that there may not be an online component. We may just do it all in class. The only stress that you would have, in my mind, as I'm creating the exam, is whether or not you've understood the content of the classes, the slides, the reading that you've done, and what we've covered in the homeworks. The idea is if you have, then hopefully it'll be stress-free. You may not get a perfect score, but you shouldn't look at the exam and say, oh, you know, this might be an exam for a different class. So anyway, we'll see. But right now, that's what I'm thinking is going to happen. In part because I think it can be done that way, and second because we have the very first exam slot. And I'm not sure what your other exam slots might be, so you might need some of that home time to study for your other exams or study for this exam. Nothing's changed here in terms of the Zoom links. I am still actually planning on not physically being here on April 22nd, so that class is more and more likely to be online at that Zoom link. I had put some required reading from the book, and I gave it to you all at once, which means that most of you probably haven't done any of it. So, I think I've told you before, the way the brain works and the way we learn, it's very important to be exposed to things multiple times. So, in fact, there's some studies that suggest if you are going to just crunch and read it all one time, you're better off doing it now and then skimming it like closer to the exam date than you are reading it all right before the exam date. All of you know, all of you have been with yourselves since birth, so you have a better understanding of how you learn. But I'm sharing with you things that hopefully I think will make you more successful in the exam. Not just in the exam, but also in having a comprehensive picture of how humans work that is consistent with how artificial systems can work and can be implemented. So obviously that's the learning beyond the exam. So here's the topics for today. I am going to try to get through them all. Emotions, the traditional view, emotions in decision research, and emotions for artificial intelligence systems. So I talked a little bit about this last time. I just want to review it so that you can see there's really three sort of takes on the science of emotion. One is more of a classical view, which most leading scientists in the related arts, meaning psychology, philosophy, neuroscience, affective science, believe these to be outdated. And that is that emotions are characterized by things that simply happen to you, that you're a victim of whatever emotion you happen to feel. That isn't saying that some emotions can happen to you. We have a conscious and a subconscious, as we know. And just like we have thoughts that aren't in our conscious, we can have emotional thoughts that are in our subconscious. But it is to say that emotional experience is generally a conscious experience. Once it gets started, you can feel it. You know it's happening, and you can think through it. And so it's something that you're actively a part of in the subconscious by constructing, and in the conscious by constructing in a purposeful thinking process. It comes in flavors, positive, negative, neutral. We'll hear more about that as we go through today. As an aboutness, we went through several slides last time where we said, I feel sad about, or I feel sad because, suggesting that what comes after the because is the reason why you feel sad, or I feel sad about something that someone did. These things, as we experience them, conscious or not consciously, do tend to exist to enable pursuit of goals or inhibit pursuit of goals. And the classical view has three important aspects: subjectiveness, body aspects, and outward display of behavior. Missing from here is cognitive thought, because in the classical view, emotions happen to us, our responses are reactions, and so we're not constructing. Going through it again, when we construct, things aren't necessarily happening to you. Yes, there are occurrences that are happening, some of which may be out of your control, but your emotional experience is something that you are actively participating in. And if you don't believe me, you can, if you're more cognizant as you have emotional experiences, you can see that you actually can steer those experiences in different directions with some practice. It would be, it's not easy. It would be similar to if you're a right-handed person and you start doing things left-handed. Right? You can do it, but it's not necessarily something that's intuitive. If it's important to you, you can become better and better and better and better at it. If it's not important to you, then you can just revert back to writing with your right hand, writing with your left hand. Same thing with emotions. If managing your emotions and having your consciousness govern more of your emotional experience and your response to it, you can effectively sort of force yourself to have those thoughts within your consciousness, but it's kind of like writing with your other hand. And what most people tend to find is when they have a lot of energy and really want to work through it, they can do that, but then they find themselves slipping back to writing with whatever hand. Same way with your emotional experiences. We talked about affect as having a positive or negative feeling or associated with it. Eliciting aboutness remains the same, inhibiting and enabling goals. And then in the multi-component response, we just simply clarify that the outward display of behavior is not a signature or fingerprint, and the role of thought and cognition and construction. This is really more a slide that's meant to be like the emotion, how emotions are made and constructing emotions. As you'll see, we'll have one more version of this slide where we talk about what it needs to look like if we want to implement artificial intelligence systems that exhibit emotions. So let's understand a little bit better how the traditional view is understood, or what has been understood. The traditional view has as one of its center points classification. And that is to say that when you're having an emotional experience, that your emotional experience is characterized by a conceptual label. Even though in the classical view you don't think about actively participating, you can use both of these emotion classification views, whether you're using a classical theory of emotions or the constructive view of Feldman. Both of these can be used and are still used today. Okay. I'll share with you in the next few slides why both of them have issues and some things that scientists are doing to try to avoid those issues as they work in better understanding emotions and how to model and implement emotions in artificial systems. In a basic and discrete, it literally is the view of emotions that most of us think about. When someone asks you, how are you feeling? And you say, I'm feeling good, or I'm feeling happy, or I'm sad. That's the basic and discrete mode. And that means, what does that mean? It means there's a word that's discrete. And if you wanted, and there's another word, and there's another word, and there's no continuity necessarily between those words. Now, that isn't to say that you can't make some sort of continuity, right? You can say, well, you're feeling sad. Well, are you feeling very sad, like extremely sad, or just slightly sad, right? So you can take a concept word and maybe try to give it a little bit of continuity about that concept. Generally, we say we're angry, we're disgusted. Here, we're angry twice. And you can have more complex emotional words which are like we talked about last time, like agitated, disappointed, conceptual words that not just describe an emotion, but maybe even give a little bit more of a clue as to what the cause of that emotion might be. The second view doesn't use discrete terms. It's called affective circumplex, and what it does is it projects your emotional state still into a two-dimensional axis, so like an XY axis. And in that XY axis, the X coordinate might be valence, and the Y coordinate might be arousal. I've seen it flipped in different ways. But what it says is that you ask a person not how they feel and expect them to give you a word like I'm angry or I'm sad, but you expect them on this two-dimensional grid to put a dot. And that dot, where it goes, is a function of whether you think that emotion you're feeling is positive or negative, and how intense you feel that emotion is. Valence being pleasantness or unpleasantness, how positive or negative it is, and arousal being how intense that emotion is, or how not intense. These are the primary classification systems used in the majority of emotion research, I would say, over at least the last 50 to 60 years. Although now you'll see some changes in that. If we think of emotions as just another way of thinking, then applying one of these classification approaches, basically discrete or affective circumplex, would be comparable to asking you to apply that to your thoughts. Right? So it wouldn't say, how do you feel? It would say, how are you thinking today? And you might say, I'm thinking very analytically today. Or you might say, I'm thinking very slowly today. Or you might say, my thoughts are a bit blurry today. This morning when I woke up, I would say my thoughts were definitely slow today. It wasn't an emotional experience. And I would say my thoughts were not only slow, they were almost not present. Normally I would get up, as you know, one of the first things I do is go make some coffee for myself. And I found myself in the kitchen, just kind of walking this way and then walking another way, until my wife said, are you going to make coffee? Oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. Okay, now I'm going to be making coffee. So it wasn't an emotional experience. I wasn't, to the extent that all thoughts are comprise emotions, certainly it was. But it wasn't that it was a overly emotional experience. I wasn't not making coffee because I felt sad or I was upset about something. My thoughts were a little slow and disjointed. Again, I'm not describing my emotions. I'm describing my thoughts as I felt they were being expressed. My wife picked up on it because she could look at me and see that I was just kind of moving in different directions. And she didn't say, well, what are you mad about? Or why are you so happy? Her response was, I think, looking at me and saying his thinking seems to be off. Okay. So just in a similar way as you might communicate emotions, you might communicate thinking. Some of you might have experiences where you look at someone and you see that they seem like they're not really there, and you say, "What are you thinking about? What do you mean?" Well, it looked like you weren't really here, or like you weren't listening to what I was saying. And they say, "Oh, I was just thinking that tomorrow I have a bunch of stuff to do, and I'm trying to figure." So just like you can have emotions that impact your what you show externally, you can have thoughts that have relatively low emotional content that can also do the same thing. Okay? And so that's what I mean by akin to classifying your thoughts, meaning just in those examples that I said. Right? So I can have thoughts that are scattered. I can have thoughts that are disjointed. And those are words that I'm attaching to my thoughts that, again, aren't thoughts that I'm describing in any sort of real emotional way. I'm just describing my thought patterns. I could also take that and put that into a neural thinking circumplex and say, okay, in terms of your slowness, how unpleasant or pleasant was your slowness, or maybe say how characteristically slow versus nominally slow was your slowness, and how intense is your slowness. Right? And I can have someone put a point on a 1 or 2 dimensional graph related to how they're describing their thinking. So at the very bottom here, we play classification of emotion as a square peg in a round hole. And what we really mean is, just like in classifying thoughts, whether they have a high emotional content or low emotional content, classification isn't really the right tool when you think about it. Because in another tool to look at it, which we'll talk about soon, I hope not next, but soon, is communication. You should look at whether the thoughts are emotional based or not. How is that system, whether it's a computing system or a human system or an animal system, what are they communicating? This is a little bit more on the affective circumplex. It's important you understand it because it's used a lot in research where people have published talking about emotions. In this particular version, you can see that pleasant is on the right-hand side. So if the subject or you were to put a point on the right-hand side of this plot, then that would mean it was a pleasant experience. If you were to put it on the right-hand side up, it would mean that it was not only a pleasant experience, but that it was a high arousal experience. In other words, that it was an intense experience. If you put it down, it would mean it's a low arousal. In the book, Lisa Feldman says that younger people like yourselves like to be in the upper right-hand side of this quadrant. That you like to have positive experiences with high arousal. You can decide that for yourself if it fits you. And that older people, definitely not including me, like to be on the lower hand, right-hand side, which is pleasant and low arousal. They tend to like calming environments. If you're on the left side here, it says that you are having an unpleasant experience for that emotion, or you're ascribing an unpleasant experience to it. And if you're on the upside, it means it's an intensely unpleasant one. If you're on the downside, it means it's not an intensely unpleasant one, it's a mildly unpleasant one. These words aren't really supposed to be there because they're emotional concept words. But in putting this together and in explaining it, you'll often find that people assume that some of these things have universal placements within the affective circumplex, which they don't. So if you are thrilled, it is thought of as pleasant valence, high arousal. Okay? But you can be thrilled riding on a roller coaster, and there might be some people that would look at being thrilled as negative valence, high arousal. So you have to be a little bit careful here not to take these word examples too seriously, because in reality, when you ask people, if you were to put a bunch of people on a roller coaster ride and have them put on this chart where they were feeling from a pleasantness and arousal standpoint, you would find people at various points on this graph. For me, in some roller coasters, frankly, I would find myself on the left side. I'm sorry, on the low arousal side, because it's not as intense maybe as other roller coasters I've been on, and I've been on a bunch of roller coasters. If you put my mom on any roller coaster, she would definitely be on the high arousal, unpleasant, valence side of things. The same roller coaster, different experience, maybe even the same words as well. That was thrilling. So here's some of the issues with affective circumplex. As far as implementation is concerned, I haven't really seen much benefit in using affective circumplex. And that's in part because of what I've already mentioned, which is that you can take two people and they can have the same experience. And whether or not they use the same word or not, they aren't necessarily going to have the same rating on the affective circumplex scale. They're not going to be in the same quadrant necessarily, even if they are in the same quadrant. Some of them may be closer to 0 and some of them may be closer to the maximum. So you can't really compare that. It doesn't take the subjectiveness out of it. What it really does is, but on the other hand, it does at least eliminate, if you're careful, the use of the words, so that you can compare emotional experiences in response to the same stimulus, provided you don't assume that that stimulus is supposed to give the same response. It still requires a label, at least a label of good or bad or pleasant or unpleasant to that experience. But it also does not capture the emotional space as continuous. And what that means is that, yes, for a given person, you may have continuity in terms of their subjective rating of arousal. But given that emotions have different experiential content, there's no real way to move on the scale from one side to another side as you're thinking about different emotional experiences. You can hop, but there's not necessarily continuity as you move through. And the other issue with it is that it potentially creates a false, non-subjective quantitative sense. In other words, if you look at an XY axis, you can see I can put a dot anywhere on this axis. So it kind of feels like it's continuous. And it kind of feels like it's more quantitative because it's a graph. The other part, which I don't know if it bothers you, but it bothers me, is that low arousal and calmness, which are the examples that were used for low arousal, you'll see serene and calm, or lethargic and depressed. At least from a mathematics standpoint, I'm used to thinking about low as like 0 or close to 0, and high as a magnitude that's away from 0. So in this case, high arousal is a magnitude away from 0 in a positive direction, but low arousal is actually a magnitude away from 0 in a negative direction, which means that if you're close to the crossover point of that axis, you're presumably in some sort of nominal arousal state. You will see some people in the literature actually make the low arousal the maximum negative value 0 or 1. I'll show you an example of that today in class, so that it goes from 1 to 9 or 0 to 10. But they also do that for the valence. And in the valence, if you're going to do unpleasant or pleasant, it kind of makes sense to have positive and negative values. Okay, so we're going to go through an example here. There's a book called The Handbook of Emotion, Elicitation, and Assessment, Tools and Methods to Elicit Emotions. And I think, in my opinion, it's sort of one of the most dangerous books ever written, because if you're doing research and you're new to the area, a lot of research studies use this book. So you may be tempted to just basically do what they did without really thinking about whether or not it makes sense for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. So if you get into this field and decide that you do need to better understand emotions, or maybe even do some experiments or research in the field, I would encourage you to definitely look at this book, but at least decide for yourself whether or not any of the methods here are useful to you or not. And whether or not they're valid given whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. There are a bunch of different techniques that are presented in the book. These are only 4, but they're, I think, the 4 most common that I've seen in emotion research. One of them is, the first one's called film clips. And this is literally, you want to study someone's emotional response or what they experience or how they manage an emotion. You literally show them a video with audio, and they watch it, listen, and ideally you show them something that you think is going to cause some sort of response. You show them something that you think is going to make them mad. And the thought process historically, if you think about being angry as an innate experience, that everybody has the same experience of anger, then you can convince yourself that if I see a video and it makes me angry, then I can show that video to other people, and even though I can't feel what they're feeling, they're all going to be angry. Right? So now I can do some research by seeing what people do when they're angry, because I'm going to make them all angry by having them watch this video. And if you've paid attention in this class and read the book, you realize that that's a pretty big assumption, and one that's probably not typically right. That people, when they see videos, are going to have different emotional experiences, even if they may be somewhat related to anger. Static photos, same thing. No video, show a picture, and that picture is intended to have you feel some emotion. And the way they figure out if it's going to feel that emotion is they may take a picture and show it to 20 people or 50 people that have nothing to do with the experiment, and have them say what emotion they feel, either assign a word to it, or have them assign a valence and an arousal on a chart. And then you can, if you have them assign a valence and arousal, you can average those numbers and say, okay, well, this photo is going to create a median valence and arousal of this for a participant that I subjected to. Or if you have them use a word, you can say, okay, the most common word for this video is sadness. And so this video clearly elicits sadness in someone. Same with the video, same with the pictures. Relived emotions are different. Here you don't show them a video or a photo. Here what you do is you ask them to relive an experience. So you might say, I want you to think about something from your childhood that upsets you. I don't want you to do this, by the way. That upsets you, right? And the idea is, and you might say to the subject, and I'm going to leave you alone for like 10 minutes. If you find yourself not thinking about it, I want you to go back to thinking about it. And then you might then do some measurements or ask some questions to see how that person, what facial expressions they have while they're thinking about it, how their heart rate might change while they're thinking about it. But there, basically, you're asking them to either relive something that they've experienced, or you might do a common experience of something. For example, if you were if you were with a Christian religious group, and you wanted to see the impact of near-term emotional events, you might say, okay, what I want you to do now is pause and think about Notre Dame in Paris. Right? You might want to see, I want you to think about it and what that means for yourself and what that means for for other people within your congregation. Just giving you an example. And so that could be useful if I was doing a study today on emotional impact of recent events. That might be something that I want to use. And if I did, then I would be reliving an emotion that someone experienced today. Does anybody not know that happened? Or does anybody not know that Notre Dame burned basically almost to the ground today? Has anybody been there? So I've been there a few times, and I'm not an overly religious person, but it was sad. It was sad now thinking about it because someone built that. Like, I don't know. I think it was 700 years ago. Huh? 1,163. So 800 years ago. And it pretty much looked to me pretty much burned to the ground, with the exception of a little bit of towers. So that's a relived emotion. A dyadic interaction is one where you have people experience emotions sort of in real time. They're not thinking about what happened in the past. You might just give them a topic to discuss. You might give a father and son in a room, maybe they're part of your study, and you might say, okay, I want you all to have a conversation today about the right age when the son should be able to make all their decisions independent of the dad. And then you might observe, but that's a dyadic interaction, meaning it's something that's happening right there. Those are just 4 examples of things that are used to elicit emotions and emotional research. So we'll do some emotional research right here. Not really research, but here's an actual static photo, because you might have been all this time thinking, oh. So if I was observing one of the judges, I would have observed some of you smiling at the photo. Some of you not even paying attention to the photo, which meaning that obviously it didn't emotionally stimulate you. Give me some of your answers here as to what, this isn't, you're not being asked to describe what emotion a dog is feeling. This is supposed to elicit an emotion from you. Okay. So what emotion does this elicit from you? Just to see if we all agree the same thing or not. Yeah?
Concern emotion?
Concern, yeah, for sure. Concern. Maybe he's concerned, he sees a dog running by itself, and maybe you don't envision that there's anything around it. Or you see the dog is maybe hungry and it's running towards you, or you're bit by a dog. If you want to, never under any obligation to share.
That looks like a cane to me. I wonder who it's
Thank you. So if I zoom the picture that way,
so that person might need the cane. That looks like a cane.
So concern. Did anybody feel anything other than concern? Yeah? What? And Since relaxed? Okay. So you felt some calmness, some relaxation. But you can easily see that if this picture was of a dog, let's say the dog looked like your dog, or if the dog looked like a dog that had bit you, or if you you don't really believe that animals should be running alone on the beach. So you can see how you might have a different emotional experience, and obviously in this class, we've already seen that. That's supposed to evoke happiness in people. So someone took this picture, did a study like this, obviously more controlled, and decided that most people felt happy when they saw the running dog. I can tell you, you know more about my wife probably than you thought you would by this point. She's not really a dog person. So there's no way that this photo is going to make her happy in any way whatsoever. Like I think I'm going to show it to her after class. Okay, what's this? I heard someone say sadness. What else? Regret? Confused? Any of you feel mad or angry?
Hungover.
Hungover? So sadness. For me, when I looked at it, it kind of made me feel angry. Just because I guess I probably assumed that it did not die of natural causes. Maybe it did. I don't know of anybody that sees this, but that actually is afraid. I mean, it's clearly a picture. Okay. Okay. And so part of the problem is people respond with what they think that they should respond. Right? So they see it and say, well, I think that the right answer is fear. And so I'm going to write down fear rather than what they're really experiencing. The reality is, if anybody has watched any TV or movies over the last 5 to 10 years, you're probably not going to be afraid of a picture of a snake like this, right? And you've seen so many intense snakes. You saw Harry Potter while you were a child, but this one's probably not going to evoke much to you. To me, it might invoke an inquisitiveness. I'm kind of curious when I saw it, I was kind of curious more about the snake. So I felt a little bit of engagement towards the snake. I don't really get the surprise, but obviously they put surprise because most people feel surprised, or at least most of the people that they got together to do this. This is the last one. What? Disgust? Everybody disgusted? Who's not disgusted? What's different than the disgust that you felt? For me, I think it's hard with a picture, and I don't know if it's just because I've done a bunch of, because I'm more of a movie person, and in the movies I've got used to be taken, right, have an emotional experience that are both in sound and moving pictures, and then coordinated images. Sorry. Looking at a picture. So actually, it's kind of interesting because when I saw it, I didn't really see any disgust. But whoever said disgust, you're in the population that they had in this study. You were definitely disgusted by it. In part, I think I wasn't disgusted because I actually really don't know what they are. What are they? Oh, okay. See, if I'd have known it was a maggot, actually, if it was a maggot on like some food that I normally eat, maybe. Okay, so there's another set of data that's publicly available. This is called the data set. We're not going to actually look at the data itself. I more want to give you a good feeling of how the lion's share, meaning the majority of emotion research, is done. So when you read something, in a newspaper or in TV, it says that, the researchers somewhere did the study and found that, Twinkies make people happy. I want you to think about these types of things because that's basically what's done. And they're not saying that everybody who eats a Twinkie is happy. What they are saying is that they got a bunch of people from somewhere, of some culture, in some country, under some conditions, and statistically more of them were happy eating a Twinkie than were not happy eating a Twinkie. Okay. And so because of that, there's a lot of studies, a lot of research that is literally just that. So if you are building something that you think is going to behave emotionally like a human being is going to behave, then those studies may be useful, right? You just want to make sure that those studies are replicable, meaning that someone else did a study somewhere else and used the same conditions and found that, yeah, in fact, it doesn't matter, where you do the study or who the researchers are, you're going to find that people generally are happier eating Twinkies. So in the DEEP study, they did an online self-assessment, 120 music videos. So they went online on YouTube, found 120 music videos, got 14 to 16 volunteers. I don't have a lot of information on the volunteers, but they weren't the subjects of the research. And have them watch 1 minute of each of these 120 videos and fill out basically a form on each one of the ones that they watched related to their emotional experience. And that would be similar to what they could have done if they had taken these pictures and said, okay, I'm going to take these pictures, picture of the maggot, picture of the dog running down the beach, and you get 14 to 16 people, and I'm going to have them, fill out a form that's going to tell me what their emotional experience was in response to that. And then based on analyzing that, I'm going to maybe pick out the best ones. So I looked at 120 videos, and if some people said they were happy and some said they were angry, and I'm trying to elicit a common response, then maybe I won't use that one. Right? I'll use one where more people tended to give the same response. The idea being that maybe in my test group, not my volunteer group, in the group I'm going to actually test, that hopefully they will also have a similar response. Then they actually recruited volunteers, 32 volunteers in a human study. You can't do this at home. You have to get approval, at least in the United States, from an institutional review board. University of Puerto Rico, West has one. So if you ever want to do research here as part of your academic program, you can write up your research, submit it to the board, get approval. Anytime that you're using people as part of doing the research. And the idea there is they want to make sure that basically you're not going to do anything bad to the people that you're doing the research, and that you have their permission to do the research and that sort of thing. Here, they put EEG headset on, so a bunch of electrodes. I think there were 32 of them that they put all over the subject's head. They put a little pulse oximeter to measure the, not just the pulse, but the pulse signal. They put electrodes on the skin to see the conductance, which is related to sweat. They put little electrodes near the eyes so they can measure the movement of the eye. And then they had them watch 40 of these videos. And there they had to then answer questions about their emotional experience as they were watching the video. So the nice thing about the DEEP data set is these experiments are done all the time and done for many, many years. They decided that they we're going to work to make everything available publicly. And so whether or not everything's available publicly is still a little bit of a question, but a lot is available publicly. So what did they make available publicly? They made available online ratings, and these are the ratings that the volunteers gave to the 120 videos that they saw. They made available the list of the videos. The only problem is they were music videos on YouTube. And a lot of the people that posted them didn't have permission to post them. So if you go back and try to actually find all 120 videos, you're not going to be able to find a lot of them anymore on YouTube because they were removed. Okay, they have participant ratings. These were the actual people that were involved in being exposed to the 1-minute clip. Not of all 120 videos, but just of the 40 that they chose to use. And then the participant questionnaire. Normally when there's a human study, you send out a notice and say, hey, you know, you want to participate in the study. Oftentimes they'll pay you some sort of stipend, like 20 bucks or gift card or something if you do. And then you come in, they'll ask you to fill out a survey. And then at least if you're doing one of these studies, they'll put a bunch of stuff on you and see, and let you watch a bunch of music videos, see how you respond. There are 3 other things here, the face videos. So some of the subjects, not all, but for 22 of the subjects, gave them permission to actually record them while they had all this stuff on them and while they were watching the video. That's useful in case you want to have a judge later on, you know, judge facial expressions or other emotion, or see, hey, that person really looked away from the video a bunch. Maybe that's important in terms of understanding the data. The original data from all these things that were hooked up on them, and then pre-processed data. You recall from when we did homework with artificial intelligence that as you worked through the data, you started with the raw data, and then you began to process the data to get it ready for the algorithms. So as you do things to the data, that's called processing the data. And so here the original data is presumably unprocessed, although it may be processed a little bit. And the pre-processed data means that they've done some conditioning or done some changes to the actual data. Why is that important? Because if you don't agree, or if they did some of that in a technique that's outdated, then it can put some questions to the results. So it's important to know everything that's done to the data. I'm going to show you the 4 of the parameters here in some detail. The online ratings. Again, this was the ratings for the videos, the 120 videos that 14 to 16 volunteers did. They assign each of those 120 videos an ID. ID is a number between 1 and 120. Those volunteers had to assign a valence. Here you can see they didn't do negative for valence or arousal. Their numbers between 1 and 9. So the number 5 basically is like a 0 in the affective circumplex. Dominance, we haven't talked about in class, but dominance is a characteristic of an emotion. So that relates to control. So example, fear. Normally when people are fear, they feel a little less control. They're afraid of something. So that would be a low dominance. If anger sometimes can feel more controlling, even though you may be out of control, you may feel more control from the anger. And that would be maybe a more dominant emotion. So it's another way of looking at emotions other than valence and arousal. The wheel slice is similar to discrete and basic. You make them choose a word here between 1 and 16. If they just can't choose a word, then they here would put a 0, basically saying that that person wasn't willing to choose one of these 16. They felt like their emotion just was was different from all these 16. And then will strength is similar to arousal, where basically you're assigning an intensity to whichever concept it was that you chose. So when you use wheel slice and wheel strength, it's kind of somewhere between the basic discrete classification and the affective circumflex. You're making them use a word, but then you're still letting them give you an intensity of that word. Similar to saying, to the example I gave where I said, are you extremely sad or just a little bit sad? A little bit sad, as a wheel slice, you would pick sad, number 9 here, and for strength, you would say maybe 0 to 1. If you're extremely sad, here you would pick 4 for strong, because that's the scale they chose. In this case, the elicitation videos, we already talked about them. I'd rather show you some examples, so I'm going to go past that. Participant ratings. Now, this is the actual people that came in and were shown the video clips. There were 32 of them. And then they had to then, while they had all this stuff attached to them, had to also mark valence, arousal, dominance. 2 things that are on here that I didn't see in the other ones. So they might be there, liking and familiarity. Liking means they asked the person afterwards, did you like the video? And then the other one was, were they familiar with it? They realized at some point in the study that if the person liked the video or if they'd seen the video a bunch before, it might influence their emotional response. They wanted to know if that person had seen it before or at least was familiar with the video and or liked it, right? Because a video that's supposed to elicit happiness, but you don't really like the video or you don't like the song, might not make you happy just because you've already had an experience with it. And then the participant questionnaire. In the data set, the electrodes, there's 32 of them that they put on the head. This is to see the signals that are coming out of your scalp from your brain. The signals very around the skull you are. This is a map. So these cryptic letters here, FP1, AF3, they correspond to a map. This is a map basically on top of your head. So when you look at the data, you can see is electrode here, is electrode here. It's giving me whatever response. We had other electrodes, these EXGs. The first 4 are the eyes. The next 2 relate to the mouth. And then they have the shoulder blades, it looks like here. Why do they have that? Because recognize that if the EEG is electrodes here, and you're trying to measure a brain signal, and the person moves their eye, you can actually get an electrical signal from their eye movement. So the idea is you try to correct for or filter out signals when the eye is moving. Same with motion. They have a respiration belt, that's number 45, so that they can measure the breathing. Breathing is important. Actually, it shows up in plethysmographs, which are the heartbeat signals. Will actually show some variation slowly in breathing. Because the absorption that you use and take that measurement relates to the oxygen content in your blood, which is not constant. It also varies as you breathe and take in oxygen, pump in oxygen. Temperature of the body through the pinky, and then at the bottom, there's a time sync related to when they're doing things to the subject. This is a time graph showing when they started watching the video, when they stopped watching the video. That way they can correlate all that other data which they were taking as a function of time. Of all the electrodes, you're taking data all throughout while the person, before and after, during and after the person watches the video. I want to show you here a little bit. I'm not going to worry about the sound because I'll just take some time off. If you don't want to watch the video, you can see it at home, basically. But I'll show you a little bit of the video here. Okay, so you're getting a deep dive look at an actual research study, right? Where presumably this would have cost a few $100,000 and researchers and graduate students, and this is what they've done. So it's done quite a bit. And the thing I really like about this study is that they tried as best they could to share a lot. So that video is the one I have here in green. Numbers are a little small here. Try to make it a little bigger. It's online ID number 2. And these are from the 14 to 16 volunteers that just rated. They weren't part of the study. They just tried to find videos that would evoke a similar type of response, at least for them. You can see here that the range was from 5 on the low end, which again means neutral. It means they didn't really feel much of an emotion. To 9, there was one person that had a 9, one person that had a 5. So one person just felt very intense because 9's the top on the scale. The scale goes from 1 to 9. I've corrected the scale on the right. Correction means just valence, where 0 is neutral. So you can see here there were no 4s, 3s, 2s, or 1s. So they're all positive at least. But they vary from neutral to very strong to medium. So what we can say, at least with this video, is it didn't seem in this group to elicit any negative reactions. But some people really just didn't care much about it, or kind of, and others, at least one person felt really strongly about it. So I'm not really sure what it says about valence, other than there was no negative valence. Arousal, you can see here, one person that put a 1, it was the same person that put a 5 for valence. They weren't aroused at all. And then another person put a 9 that had put a 6 for valence. So they had felt that was a little slightly positive, but very arousing. Okay, arousing just means intensity of the response. So when you look at the data, you can see that whatever number is going to characterize this video isn't really any of the people that saw the video, right? Because if you go across valence, arousal, dominance, wheel slice, remember wheel slice is the concept word. It looks like maybe the 3 is sort of the most popular concept word used, right? And it was used 5 times. So not even most of the people use the same concept word of 3. We look on the video list, hopefully. That's that top green slice there, experiment 1. So you can see there for experiment 1 that it was supposed to be fun. Fun is what that's supposed to, what we're supposed to feel when you saw it. Did anybody feel fun? Fun a little bit. I felt happy. I would say, in a goofy kind of way, because I felt like goofy that I felt happy watching it. I felt like the person in the video was having fun, but I wouldn't say I really felt fun. So this is where you get into the subjectiveness, and why it's really important to really understand how these experiments are done, so that if you're trying to implement things or feel like, hey, my robot's, not really reacting with the fun emotion when they watch the video, just keep in mind that most of the people that were in the experiment didn't either. Okay? So that was fun. We look at the participants. Hopefully. This is, again, experiment 1 in green. And let's take a look at what they did. You can see that actually 2 of the participants, you can see that in red all the way to the right. Maybe really small. I'll try to zoom it a little bit, but you'll be able to see it online. 2.49 negative and 0.95 negative. So there was at least 2. When they did the 16, remember, those volunteers, all of them were either neutral or positive. Here, 2 of the participants felt negative about it. I don't know why that is. Maybe that would show up in the survey. You can see as far as the other ones, there's some variability. I'm not sure I can pick commonality out just by looking at it. But if you were doing the study, you would just basically take a mean and an average and a deviation and say that's what the valence was for that study. Again, it doesn't matter really how you look at it. They're all looking at the same video. Some of them were more familiar with it than others. Had anybody here ever seen this video? No? So you would have been good test subjects because you don't have that other variable of having seen it and had some time. Either maybe you did like it the first time, but now it's no big deal. But, obviously, you've seen music videos, not just that same music video. When they say familiarity, they don't necessarily mean have you seen that one before. It's more of a subjective, how familiar is the video. Right? So if you've seen a bunch of videos of people dancing around in a garden with butterflies, they may be more familiar with you. You may didn't see that video before. And the last thing I'll show you for today is the questionnaire. Does anybody see anything? So if you're reading the results of the DEEP study, and a lot of people now, by the way, are analyzing the DEEP data since it's available and writing their own papers about what they conclude from looking at the data. Do you see anything overly similar about the people that are involved in the study? Can you read those numbers? First off, excuse me? Well, right-handed people, right? Yeah, look at the age. If you look at that, pretty much everybody's in their 20s, a few in the early 30s, and there's one there at the bottom that's 36. Excuse me?
There's also someone that's
19. Okay, sorry, I didn't see that. So the other thing is drugs, right? How many? I don't want you to answer this question, but if you could envision yourself like being a drug user, how likely are you to write down on a form that you use drugs? Any form. Okay. Other thing here is education. These are some pretty educated 20 to 30-year-olds. Right? I mean, they're not representative of if you just go out and take a random sampling of people. So whatever you're concluding from this study really is pretty focused, right? If there is a conclusion, it's going to be based on people in their 20s who have for the most have a college degree, are highly educated, although there's one person that only had high school. Not that that's a bad thing, but just comparing them to the others that were in the study. All right, so that might be more detail than you ever wanted to know about emotion research. But the key learning experience here, I think, and the reason I wanted to spend a lot of time going through that grungy detail is because as you implement AI systems from a human perspective, you're going to read and have to at some point rely on work that other people have done. And that's okay to do it, provided that you understand the assumptions, the methodologies, and I'll call it the limitations or the context under which those results are relevant to whatever it is that you're trying to do. Okay, any questions? All right, I think we'll pause here then, and we'll see you Wednesday.